This is an oral history interview for the UH Space Archives. I'm Charles Lundquist. Today is March 21st, 2006, and our visitor today is Jack Waite. Jack, it's good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
To start off, can I ask you to give a little background on where you spent your youth, where you went to school, and how you got into the space program here in Huntsville?
Well, I was born in 1928 in Fairfield, Alabama. Daddy was a banker in Fairfield, and like a lot of banks that were even in good shape, the bank went down, and at probably the age of 3, we left Birmingham to survive, and Daddy went with the Federal Land Bank in Clanton, Alabama, and I went through elementary school and junior high in Clanton. And then my dad went as business manager in Bursar to a Methodist Junior College in Boaz, Sneed. And so we moved to Boaz, and I attended senior high school in Boaz and went to Sneed Junior College, very good junior college, and I lived with the parents in the dormitory and enjoyed taking any course that I thought would be of interest and benefit to me in life. So I had quite a variety of courses, but I got my some background in business courses, pre-engineering, and met my wife Jane there. So from there, after we graduated at Sneed, we married, and then I worked about a year, and my mother decided that if they'd gotten, I was the youngest, if they'd gotten all the others through college during the Depression, Jane and I were going to college. So Mother and Daddy said, okay, you have a joint checking account with us, and you go to Tuscaloosa. And so Jane and I went to Alabama and went through, graduated in February of '51. And at that time, jobs were not too plentiful, but I had been interviewed by General Electric in the summer, and they had offered me a job that I could either take or reject up to the time of graduation. Well, just before graduation, my mother and dad had been to Huntsville to a funeral. One of Mother's relatives had died, and they'd been to a funeral here, and they had just received a letter from Roman Haas Company in Huntsville, and Daddy opened it and talked to them, and so they were so excited about me turning down my job. I was going to go to the gas turbine division in Cincinnati with General Electric. Instead, I was thinking about how elderly my parents were, and Jane's parents were from Scottsboro, and they were, I thought, very elderly. I don't know exactly how old they were now, but they were many years younger than I am now. But we made a sudden change, and I went to work at Roman Haas and worked there for probably 2 or 2.5 years. Wonderful place, really enjoyed it. They started talking about transferring me to Bridesburg, and I decided maybe I needed to make a change in my career. So I went with civil service, and I think it was in February of '53 or '4. And I guess I want to go into a little detail there.
What field of engineering did you graduate in?
In mechanical.
Mechanical.
And then after being with the government, I was working in test lab. I decided I wanted to go back. I've been taking graduate courses 2 nights a week. Had really had the real privilege of having some wonderful professors, Dr. Reidel and a number of Dr. Hellebrand, and a number of the Germans. I'm trying to think of one that became senior vice president of TRW.
Dolph Teal.
Dolph Teal. I had a course under Dolph Teal. I do have just a funny thing I'd like to tell
Go ahead.
about.
Yes, please.
Well, we had about 12 or 13 in the class, and it was the old Graduate Institute at Butler High.
This was Teal's class.
Teal's class.
All right.
And the last day of class, he said, Waite, you made the only A. You made the only A. And I was so pleased. And so Dolph Teal in the class decided that I was going to take him across the street for a hamburger and a beer. So I had to take everybody out to celebrate my A in class. Well, lo and behold, the report cards come out, and I had a B+. And I called Dolph Teal, and I said, Dolph, they've made a mistake on my grade. He said, Waite, I got to thinking about it, and he said, I don't believe anybody ever knew enough about partial differential equations to make an A. And so I changed that to a B+. Well, nothing was ever said about that. Years later, I was in 10th floor conference room and sitting next to Dr. von Braun, which was unusual, but I was sitting next to Dr. von Braun. And Dr. von Braun, Dr. Dolph Teal was visiting us as the senior vice president from TRW, and they were really rolling out the carpet for Dr. Teal. And they went around the table introducing everybody to Dolph Teal. And we got around, I was the last one up for von Braun. And I said, Dr. von Braun, I know more about him, and I've known him longer than I want to know him. I don't want to have anything else to do with that man. I thought Dr. von Braun was going to think. You could have heard a pin drop anywhere. And then I told him this story. But let's see. I started out in test lab, and I got into the instrument design and development area. I was in mechanical engineering, but I got into the instrument design and development area. I did go up till my senior year with a double major, EE and ME, and then made the decision that married, I needed to go on and get out, so I concentrated and got my degree in mechanical. But I worked there in test lab, and Carl Hamburg agreed to me going back to school for University of Alabama for a semester, if I could work it out. And Jim Dowdy was head of training, and I went over to see Jim, and I said, Jim, I want to take a sabbatical and go back to school and finish up my master's. And Jim said, well, Jack, I'm just sorry, we can't give you a sabbatical. And after, like that woman does on Millionaire, make you think you've lost. Well, after Jim let all of my blood run to my head, he said, but if you wanted to go back, full pay, TDY pay, books and tuition, we'll send you. And I said, well, I could work. So Jane and I went back and finished up my master's there, and then worked on Carl's staff up until ABMA was formed. And when ABMA was formed, well, there was some interesting times there. I shared an office with Brainerd Tessman. Jerry Ann Easy, Jerry Ann was out in our office. The three of us shared an office next to Hamburg, so I introduced Jerry Ann and Rain when he was over as a dashing second lieutenant, trying to keep me posted on.
It's Rain Easy.
Rain Easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rain was giving me all the details as they came off the drawing board, so when we designed the tower with Redstone money, it would accommodate the Saturn. And so I was responsible for pulling the design together and all for the tower. What was it, east side of the tower, I guess. Well, I worked there, and then when ABMA was formed, 200 of us went with ABMA to build up a new ABMA, and I left test lab at that time, and we built up a wonderful new test facility down on the river, on the Arsenal. Hired a lot of wonderful young engineers. A lot of them are well, they're mostly retired now, but a lot of them, Guy Perry, Dick Stone, George Harsh stayed at Marshall many years. I hired them right out of college. Well, when 2 years after, right before Christmas, after we had gotten the ABMA really rolling, all the labs were rolling. I had the developmental test operations. They decided to combine ARGMA and ABMA, and I ended up with a very good job out of it. But all of my young engineers were competing with the ARGMA people that had anywhere from 15 to 25 years of civil service, and they were out in the cold. So I said, I'm going back to Marshall and get them all employed. I went back, and at that time it was very difficult to get into Marshall, and I started on executive staff.
What year would that have been, roughly?
Well, let's see, I guess 54.
All right.
I do have it here, but I believe it was 1954 that...
Well, Marshall didn't exist yet then, so it must have been 64.
I mean, 1964, right, yeah. Right, I'm sorry.
64.
Yeah, I get here in a second. Executive staff. Yeah, I went back to in 62 to 64. I was had advanced planning on executive staff.
Okay.
And sort of an interesting thing there, if I
Well,
decided to be a sideline. At that time, Frank Williams had advanced planning. I had long-range planning on executive staff, and Ernst Stuhlinger was over research projects. Well, we got together and generated the first long-range plan for NASA. And nobody ever got to see it much because there was nothing really secret about it other than NASA wanted to keep it within NASA. So it had a top secret clearance. And I do have a copy of a letter that we got back on that I'll leave with you.
It's okay, you can find it later.
I'll find it later. But NASA congratulating us on a wonderful long-range plan. It was never published. I mean, never distributed.
Was this all of NASA or just Marshall?
Well, we put it together. It ended up that was our input from Marshall to headquarters. But it was an all. We had all of the planetary missions included, and I'm trying to think of when we were going to Mars and Venus, but it was long before now. But that was a real interesting time there, and we reported directly to Hans Maus on executive staff, but it had a lot of interesting trips and meetings with Dr. von Braun and that 10th floor group. It was one time I stayed on executive staff till von Braun went to Washington, and then I went from there I went with Leland Blue in engine project office, and I had advanced propulsion with Leland. And Leland was one of the finest bosses you could ever have. Leland would tell you what needed to be done and not try to tell you how to do it or anything else. He left it up to you, and you went back to Lee if you had a question. And he gave you the flexibility of doing it your way, which was great. But I really enjoyed working with Lee on that. And we started out doing some early work on the Lox hydrogen engine at Pratt Whitney, which later was a C1, I think. And we had a toroidal engine contract with Rocketdyne, a spiked type arrangement and all. But very interesting I really enjoyed the work in advanced propulsion. Leland was carpooling with, at that time, with Dr. Reese from Montesano, and Leland got drafted to become AAP project manager, which later became Skylab. And I don't think Leland ever asked me. He just told me we were moving over. He didn't tell me what I'd be doing on Skylab. He didn't have any idea what I'd be doing. So the next thing I knew was with Leland on Skylab, and I looked around, and I'd always had a lot of interest in science and spent a lot of time down in your lab. So I decided, well, I'm going to work the experiments area. So I had to find a job and Marshall had the role of the experiments. Other than the biomed and earth applications, we had the other experiments here at Marshall, and we had really good support from Space Science Lab. We had really good support from S&E, and we came up with the requirements document on all experiments, even Houston experiments, to check the compatibility from a mission standpoint, from physical integration and mission standpoint. We did that in my office. I had a wonderful support from Martin Denver on that experiment integration. So we did all the experiment integration analysis for NASA on Skylab. I say with the exception, ATM was going to fly separately, and then later it did fly on Skylab, but external. And the biomeds, we not only, Bob Swinghammer even developed those in-house in Marshall.
He talked about that when we interviewed him.
And we had the best go no-go testing on those. I mean, we really had good reliability on those because we had Dr. Thornton, that was the strongest person I ever met, one of the astronauts. And we get Dr. Thornton in to try anything we design, and if he didn't tear it up, it was fine. And he tore up the bicycle ergometer. We redesigned it. About the first 3 times, Thornton came to Huntsville to test it out. But we had a really wonderful time on Skylab, working very closely with the Skylab engineers, and we had a group at Huntsville, S&E and Martin, supporting us on anything that happened during the mission operations. So on Skylab, I spent all of the manned portion of the mission down at JSC. Had a real fine interface with Chris Kraft and a group down there. It was really an interesting time. Really hard to keep. It was a wonderful career. When I came back, there was nothing open anywhere at that time, and I first went to work again in a staff job, and I was working with Rick Chappell on. We had a mission there. The solar mission. I'm trying to think of the name we had for AMPS, atmospheric, magnetospheric, and plasmas in space, and I managed a little study project there, and that was a wonderful experience. We did a real good job on that, and everything would have been fine, but we did a little too much job on it. And when it got to headquarters, Goddard, which was very much a part of headquarters, thought we might be encroaching on them, and that's the only project I worked on we got canceled because we did too good a job on, but we had AMPS there. Well, after AMPS, I went to work with Fred Spear, and I was Fred Spear's deputy in the project office for science I can't remember exactly what we were called, but all the major science programs, well, the main ones we were HEO, A, B, and C, and some of the other early ones, but
I think Gravity Probe A was around there.
Gravity Probe A. I worked on Gravity Probe A in every office I was ever in. I started out with Gravity Probe A, up with Dr. Stillinger, Ernst Stillinger a little bit.
Are you sure you're not confusing A and B?
Gravity. It must have been. It was a very early study on Gravity Probe. We had a study.
Probably B then.
Probably B. Very early study, and that was always raising his head. But that was really early on we worked at, and then over there John Stone was working that over with Fred Spear. But with Fred, Fred and I worked together fine. If I ever disagreed with Fred, I never did. I waited till the next morning and discussed it. We were both in early and discussed it with him early in the morning, and sometimes I'd have him very upset, but usually he'd come back the next day and he'd say, after thinking it over, I think that was a good idea, we'll go along with it. But I enjoy that, but I never had been a deputy to anyone, and I really didn't like the deputy role at all. I liked Fred and I liked the work, but didn't like the deputy role. And Jim Powers, our HEO-B project manager, was killed in that southern flight.
Yes.
And it really left things in a real mess. AS&E was having some real trouble, and they had some wonderful people, and they were going to. It would have been wonderful, but it wouldn't have been out of the pipeline yet.
They were doing an X-ray telescope.
X-ray telescope on that, and when it started out, Dr. Giacconi was president of AS&E, and then he left AS&E, and we continued that experiment. I spent a lot of time. I finally, Fred was smart enough to argue with Dr. Giacconi on science, and that didn't go over good at all. So finally, after Giacconi complained, I became the only interface with Dr. Giacconi, and he was great to work with. I mean, he could scare you to death, but as you got to know him, he was just wonderful to work with.
Let me just interject a comment here. Riccardo Giacconi got the Nobel Prize a few years ago for his X-ray astronomy work.
Right, and I was really very pleased to see that, and very deserving. And that was a very complex experiment, and we had a barrel, and we would rotate it around, and I'm trying to think whether there were 7 or 8 instruments as you would rotate around. We'd test the software, and who took over after Giacconi? The man working with him, do you remember his name? A young fellow at that time, very brilliant guy.
I know what you mean. I can't
think of his name. He died not too many years ago. But anyway, he would always tell me, now, it's going to work in 0G. That thing would hang up, and every time we try to rotate it, it just could not be properly tested in 1G. It was just a real problem. But anyway, that was one of the really, I liked Man in the Loop, but that was one program I really enjoyed without Man in the Loop. And I moved up to Boston to AS&E. In fact, I have an award. I survived the blizzard of '78 in Boston. But there we had just a really good interface. And then I moved up there on TDY, and Dick Smith up every few weeks to give me a boost to try to get things going there. And Fred was in Europe for a month, and things were at their worst, and trying to get it out, and it was the schedule slippage would have cost delivering to PRW would have been like $1 million a day on a schedule slip, and we were way behind, really way behind schedule, and so I decided to just draw a line in the sand, and Giaccone was not at AS&E then, but I got Ricardo's blessings on this, and I gave them, and Dick Smith's blessings, which I needed, and I gave them an ultimate, specific day in July that they were going to ship. And I said, now, I'm going to have enough air ride vans up here that we can take it if everything is assembled and checked out, or we'll just put everything in the air ride vans. And we made arrangements for a clean room and where we were going to calibrate Marshall anyway. We made arrangements to assemble it and check it out in the clean room, and we moved those down, a Hill B down, and I think it was 5 air ride vans. We assembled it there, checked it out there. We brought all the crew from AS&E down, all the key people.
This was at the test facility at Marshall.
Yes,
long tube. Yeah. X-ray test facility.
And those wonderful people came down here. Some of them liked Huntsville so well they stayed. But anyway, we made the schedule to TRW. We gained 3 months with them doing that work here. But we had 3, A, B, and C were all very successful missions. And I was loving Marshall, but I decided about that time that there was not going to be, the next thing that there might be that I would be interested in working in was the Hubble telescope, and I thought I would be well past retirement age by that time. So I left Marshall and in '79 went with Teledyne Brown, head of their program development, and worked there for 3 years, and then.
Who was head of Teledyne Brown then?
Joe Moquin. Joe Moquin was a very, very impressive guy. I mean, he really thought big about Huntsville. I really enjoyed working for Joe. And Joe Moquin was there, and Charlie Granger.
Yes.
I hadn't seen Charlie lately, but Charlie Granger. But that was a fun time. But I decided there I had retired from Marshall because I had really gotten my wife and children had gotten somewhat tired of 60-hour weeks, and so I retired thinking I would not get into that, and I was back up
80-hour weeks.
I think it was worse. So I stopped there, and I decided at that time Gable House, all during Skylab, Gable House was a ball, and they built a lot of our experiments there. They had a scientific. They don't only build ball jars, but they had some great people in that science area, and so Gable House talked me into going to work 2 days a week for Ball, which was one of the most interesting jobs I ever had. I got paid for visiting friends in Huntsville and going to Ball with Jane for every quarter for a week. And
that was in Colorado.
In Boulder.
Yeah.
And I would spend that week with the various groups finding out what they were doing, what technology we had to offer, we needed to sell, and one of the first things that I sold was that the first intercept program. I don't know what the group is called now, but the Army Strategic Defense Group. Shelby Prophet, I had known at Marshall,
Yes.
and Dr. Prophet and I worked together real close on that. But that program went really well, and that was one of the first ones. And Gabe said, if you don't ever sell another program, you've done your kick. But I really enjoyed Marshall, and the only reason I ever left Marshall, Bob Pace and I had known each other on Skylab, and so we had offices together, side by side up there, and Bob was working for microgravity research. He was the vice president of something with microgravity, and I was a local rep for Ball Aerospace. And one day over lunch, Bob and I were talking, and we said, we're having so much fun working 2 days a week, and we've got so many retired friends that would really enjoy that. Let's form a little old company, and we will just spend Fridays on that. We were spending, I think, Tuesdays and Thursdays on our current job, and we'll just spend Fridays on that. So we started Pace and Waite, and Pace and Waite quickly got to the point where we had a conflict of interest, and I had to resign from Ball. I really enjoyed Ball, but then Bob and I spent the next 20 years Pace and Waite, and working. We had some wonderful people retired from Army and NASA, but mainly NASA, that worked for us, and it was just a fantastic experience. We were supporting the in-house design effort at Marshall, and we just had the cream. Well, Marshall had a lot of good people. We had the cream of the crop from the Marshall people that were working for us, and we were having really fun. I had fun working at everything I ever did. We were really enjoying working. It was just pleasant to go to work, wonderful people, and we had a president then that could have been a CEO of any major aerospace company. He was fantastic, and Paul Dixon. And Paul, I would recommend highly, but we got to the point where when you were working on you get too conservative as you get older. And the only way you survive in a business is to keep writing proposals and getting you work. And Bob and I were getting to the point where we didn't know whether we wanted to spend $100,000 to $150,000 on the next proposal or not. And we decided when you get to that point, it's time you should consider getting out of the business. But we didn't want to get out of the business at all. I went to a meeting in some banquet, and I happened to be sitting by one of my old friends, Travis Tidwell, that worked with me on Pershing 1 down at Martin, Orlando, and he was the president. He had retired from COSA, and they kept bringing him back. So I said, "What are you doing now?" And he said, "Well, I'm back at COSA." So I said, "Well, goodness gracious, I'm going to have to come over to see you sometime. What are you doing now?" He said, he has me acquiring new small engineering companies. I said, "He does?" And so I said, "When can I come talk to you?" So I went over and talked to Clarence Tidwell. Clarence and Clarence and I worked for 2 or 3 days on that. We had, I think at that time, 183 people. That's not full-time, but head count.
Right.
And Travis and I reviewed every resume and had every one of our people a job equal to what we had to pay some weight for them or better, and a lot of cases better because they were a much larger company. So we sold out. I guess we sold out April Fool Day. I guess it was 3 years this last April, and I retired at that time. But a wonderful time, and I can't think of many things I'd changed in my career if I had an opportunity. As
we were walking down the hall this morning, you mentioned you had taught some early courses at UH. Would you care to say a word about that?
Well, I was looking. I taught. I get the dates right, but I was in the mechanical engineering department. I taught drawing 1 a few times, engineering drawing 2 a few times, descriptive geometry, and I just taught at night, and that was over from March of '52 to June of '54. But that's Phil Mason. I worked for Phil, and that was another enjoyable time in my life. But it really had me. It was fun, but I got very, very busy at work and had to give it up.
That makes you a UAH old timer, though.
Right. Well, and my graduate courses, I think I had more than enough graduate courses for my master's, but I didn't have. I had to have 12 semester hours in residence, but those graduate courses there were Dovetail and Dr. Idle and Dr. Hillebrand, and they were just fantastic.
Well, is there anything else in the way of anecdotes or thoughts that you'd like to include before we conclude?
Well, I really did enjoy Dr. Space. Bob Ward is a good friend of mine, and I really did enjoy Dr. Space. And
that's Ward's new book,
and that was a book that I think was badly needed, and it was one that I really did enjoy. And I told Bob the other day I liked his better than Space Cowboys because Ed Buckby forgot how old we were, and his print so small. But Bob realized our age and used much larger print. But I try to keep involved anytime I can, and I'm always excited when we have our retiree meetings and maybe some opportunity to help them on lessons learned, because we learned a lot. We did a lot of things as we came through the system that we did not have too many people to give us much guidance. Of course, we were fortunate to have a number of the Germans that were really helpful. At the time I was talking about, when I was on Carl Hamburg's staff, I also had in the office right there with us, we were just in cubicles, Fritz Kramer. You ever know Fritz?
Yes.
Brilliant guy. Fritz Kramer, I learned a lot working with Fritz. We did a number of interesting things. One, we were having trouble right after separation on some of the early flights, and when we had separation, we got into trouble. So we decided to build a hop test stand, and Fritz and I worked on a design, and it was a big cylinder, air cylinder, that allowed the I think it was Jupiter, to move up freely, enough that would give you that separation there, and we would have a separation. And then using my automotive expertise, I designed a jack. You know these jacks that have this hard stainless steel, and you crank it up. And,
Yes.
well, it's a real simple thing to design, but we used that holding device. It would go up and then stop and hold it. So we had a lot of fun things. We did early work on water film cooling on deflector plates. When we were testing the redstones, we had a carbon wedge, and about 8 to 12 seconds, you didn't have a carbon wedge. You had rubble, and I don't know. Somebody on the West Coast had done some early work, but we worked with Fritz Kramer, and every lab had a total empire. We could do our own design, our own machine shop work, rigging, and everything. But we did a lot of work on that water film cooling. And we didn't even scorch paint after you got the hole pattern right in those deflectors for the Saturn.
Well, you've had a remarkable career, and we're very pleased you could come and tell us about it today, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and I'm sorry I took so long in rambling, but I had fun, and I guess that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. Thank you very much.
I was just made a copy of this just to leave with you, but you remember how he was thinking.
Yeah,
that was the only NASA long range plans. We're not recording now, are we?